My estate manager called me at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, her voice trembling. She said, "Nicole, a booking just came through for the Vintners Pavilion. It is for the Chen Legacy launch. But there is a note on the file." I asked her to read it. She hesitated. It says, "Under no circumstances is the owner's wife, Nicole Chen, to be informed or admitted to the property." My pulse didn't even spike. Panic is a reaction for people who don't hold the deed. I gripped my phone and said, "Let the reservation stand," Sarah gasped. "But ma'am, this is a $55,000 event." I cut her off. "No, Sarah, I own the vineyard. I own the catering company. And I own every bottle of wine they are about to drink. Don't cancel a thing." Before we see how this explodes, drop a comment. If your in-laws booked your house for a party and didn't invite you, would you lock the doors or let them in just to ruin it? Let me know where you're listening from. Sarah was silent on the other end of the line, waiting for the explosion. She expected the hurt wife, but she got the CEO. I looked at the booking details on my screen. Standard gold package, $42,000. It wasn't enough. If they wanted to play pretend royalty on my land, they needed to pay the royal tax. My instructions were precise. Move them to the platinum tier. Open the 1982 vintage reserve vault. Add the white truffle pairing to the filet mignon and authorize the beluga caviar station. Sarah stammered, asking if they had approved the cost increase. I told her not to worry. I knew Elizabeth Chen better than she knew herself. My mother-in-law would sooner die than ask the price of a bottle of wine in front of her country club friends. She assumed her son's connection would get her a discount. I was counting on that arrogance. I watched the estimate on my screen jump from $42,000 to $55,000. This wasn't petty revenge. It was a tuition fee. I hung up the phone and stared at the calendar. 4 days. I had 4 days to watch them walk into the cage I just built. Most people would have stormed over there, demanded an explanation, and gotten nothing but gaslighting in return. But I learned a long time ago that you don't interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. And Elizabeth was making a $55,000 mistake. I sat in the dark of the owner's suite, watching the staff polish crystal glasses for a party I was banned from attending. It gave me time to think about the question everyone asks when a marriage implodes like this. Why did you stay for 20 years? It wasn't love, not after the first decade. It was simple physics. Psychologists call it learned helplessness, but I call it the boiling frog effect. If you drop a frog into a pot of boiling water, it will jump out immediately to save its life. But if you put that same frog in cold water and raise the temperature 1 degree at a time, it will stay there until it boils to death. It doesn't notice the danger because the change is gradual. That was my life with the Chens. When I met Christopher, I was already building my distribution network. He was a consultant with a pedigree and no cash flow. His parents, Elizabeth and Robert, looked at me and saw a girl from the wrong side of the valley. They called my ambition aggressive and my success vulgar. At first, the water was just lukewarm, a backhanded compliment about my dress, a forgotten birthday. Then the heat turned up. I was excluded from family photos because I clashed with the aesthetic. I was seated at the children's table at Christmas when I was 35. I stayed in the pot because I thought endurance was a virtue. I thought if I just took enough heat, they would eventually respect me. But the real tragedy wasn't their cruelty, it was my complicity. I dimmed my light so my husband wouldn't be blinded by it. Christopher needed to feel like the patriarch, so I played the role of the supporting actress. I never told him that his family's dry cleaning chain had been insolvent for a decade. I never told him that the anonymous angel investor who bailed them out 3 times was actually a shell company I controlled. My private accounts quietly absorbed their property taxes. I covered their legal fees. I effectively subsidized the very snobbery they used to look down on me. I was the invisible steel beam holding up their rotting ceiling, and they treated me like the termite infestation. But tonight, looking at that $55,000 invoice, I realized the water had finally boiled over. And unlike the frog, I wasn't going to die in the pot. I was going to tip the whole stove over. Christopher came home on Thursday evening wearing the specific expression of a man who knows he is about to sell his soul for cheap. He was holding a glossy gift bag. It was from the Serenity Springs Resort, the most expensive spa in the valley. In any other marriage, this would be a romantic gesture. In ours, it was a severance package. He placed it on the kitchen counter, avoiding my eyes. He told me he thought I looked tired. He said I deserved a break. A full weekend of massages, mud baths, and complete isolation from the world. Specifically, this weekend, the weekend of the Legacy launch. I leaned against the granite island, the surface cold against my palms. I asked him, very calmly, why he wanted to send his wife away during the most important business milestone of his family's history. He flinched. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic he had developed whenever his mother, Elizabeth, gave him orders he was too weak to refuse. He said it wasn't about sending me away, it was about optics. He told me that Elizabeth was worried about the merger. She felt that the new investors were traditionalists. They valued old world lineage. He actually used the words brand confusion. According to his mother, my presence, my sharp suits, my modern business degree, my lack of a bloodline might spook the money. The punchline should have been immediate. I waited for my husband of 20 years to laugh and say, "Can you believe she said that?" I told her to go to hell. But the joke never came. Instead, he looked at me with pleading eyes. He asked me to just sit this one out, just for the weekend, just to keep the peace. He said, "It's for the family, Nicole. Once the deal is signed, everything will be better." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I wasn't looking at a partner, I was looking at a liability. He stood there asking me to hide so his mother could play pretend with my money on my estate to impress investors I secretly controlled. It was so absurd, it was almost funny. But I didn't laugh. This was the moment, the final exit ramp. If he had stood up for me then, if he had said, "My wife is the reason we are standing here," I might have called off the dogs. I might have canceled the platinum upgrade and the humiliations to come. But he didn't. He chose the illusion of his mother's approval over the reality of his wife's support. I reached out and took the gift bag. I didn't throw it. I didn't scream. I smiled a thin, razor-sharp expression that he mistook for agreement. I told him he was right. I told him I would go. I said, "You handle the legacy, Christopher. I'll stay out of sight." Relief washed over him, pathetic and immediate. He kissed my forehead, thanked me for being reasonable, and went upstairs to pack his tuxedo. I watched him go. Then I went to my office and packed my own bag. I wasn't going to the spa. I was going to the owner's suite. He wanted me out of sight. Fine. I would be invisible. But he was about to learn that the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the person shouting. It's the person watching from the dark with her finger on the trigger. Saturday night arrived, draped in the kind of golden twilight that usually makes me fall in love with my estate all over again. But tonight, I wasn't admiring the sunset. I was in the owner's suite, a soundproofed command center suspended above the main ballroom behind a panel of one-way glass. It's designed for security, allowing me to monitor events without disturbing the guests. Tonight, it was my hunting blind. Below me, the Vintner's Pavilion was glowing. My staff had outdone themselves. The crystal chandeliers caught the light of 1,000 candles, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and even more expensive lies. I watched Elizabeth Chen holding court near the center fountain. She was wearing a dress that cost more than her husband's declared income for the last 3 years, laughing at a joke made by a venture capitalist she was desperate to impress. Robert was beside her, puffing out his chest, acting the part of the benevolent patriarch surveying his domain. They looked so comfortable, so entitled. They were drinking my wine, standing on my floorboards, celebrating a legacy that was currently being financed by my credit line. On the desk in front of me, my iPad glowed with the live event tab. It was the only light in the room. I watched the numbers tick upward in real time. 1982 Cabernet Sauvignon, opened. Add 3,000. Alaskan king crab platter, refilled, at 800. Broken crystal flute, at 150. The total was now hovering at $58,000. Every sip they took was another line item on an invoice they couldn't pay. It was fascinating to watch. It was like watching a group of people feast on the deck of the Titanic, completely unaware that the captain had already scuttled the ship. My phone buzzed. It was my lawyer, David. Breach of contract drafted. Default notice prepared. Lian on the dry cleaning business ready for filing. Do we proceed? 20 feet below. Christopher was standing near the bar, nursing a drink, looking nervous. He kept glancing at the entrance, maybe worried I would show up and cause a scene. He had no idea I was dismantling his life via text message from the ceiling. I typed back, "Stand by, wait for the signal." The music softened. The lights dimmed slightly. Down below, Robert stepped up to the microphone, tapping it twice. The feedback whined, silencing the crowd. He smiled, that practiced politician smile I used to admire. He was about to make this speech. He was about to tell 50 of the wealthiest investors in the valley that the Chen family was a fortress of stability. He was about to lie to the wrong room. I set my iPad down and stood up. The silence in my suite was absolute. Down there, it was a party. Up here, it was an execution. Robert Chen had a voice made for lying, deep, resonant, and utterly convincing. He stood at the podium, gripping the edges like a statesman, and told 50 people that the Chen family dry cleaners was a pillar of independent wealth. He used words like solvent, robust, and debt-free. From my vantage point in the dark, I almost laughed. Debt-free. I had the wire transfer receipts on my laptop screen that proved I had personally covered their payroll taxes 3 months ago to keep the IRS from seizing their assets. He wasn't just embellishing, he was committing fraud. And he was doing it into a microphone while being recorded. He gestured to a man sitting in the front row, a sharp-looking gentleman in a navy suit named Mr. Sterling. Robert introduced him as the managing partner of the Helios Group, the firm that was about to acquire the family business and cement the Chen legacy. The crowd applauded. Robert beamed, soaking in the admiration. He looked at Mr. Sterling, expecting a nod of validation. He expected the check, but Robert didn't know the most important detail of the night. The Helios Group was a shell company, and Mr. Sterling wasn't a managing partner. He was my chief financial officer. I watched the scene unfold with the detached precision of a surgeon. Robert leaned into the mic and delivered the closing line of his con. And that is why, with this merger, we are guaranteeing a profitable future for the next generation, completely unencumbered by outside liabilities. Mr. Sterling didn't clap. He didn't smile. Slowly, deliberately, he turned in his chair. He didn't look at Robert. He didn't look at the crowd. He tilted his head back and looked directly up at the dark panel of glass where I was standing. The room went quiet. The guests followed his gaze, staring up at the blank, reflective window of the owner's suite. They couldn't see me, but Mr. Sterling knew exactly who was pulling the strings. He was waiting for the signal. Robert faltered, his smile twitching. Mr. Sterling? Is something wrong? I looked down at the man my in-laws had spent the entire night trying to impress. They had wined him and dined him on my dime, lied to him about assets they didn't have, and insulted the very person who signed his paycheck. It was time to close the theater. My thumb hovered over the send button on my phone. I typed a single message to Mr. Sterling. Kill it. Down below, Mr. Sterling checked his watch, stood up, and interrupted the speech. His voice was calm, projecting clearly across the silent room. I apologize, Robert. But in light of the financial discrepancies revealed in your speech regarding the company's debt status, Helios is withdrawing the offer immediately. The gasp that went through the room sucked the air out of the pavilion. Robert looked like he had been shot. Withdrawing, but we have a deal. We had a deal based on transparency, Sterling said, smoothing his jacket. We do not acquire liabilities disguised as assets. The facade didn't just crack, it shattered. I watched Elizabeth grip the tablecloth, her face draining of color. Christopher froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. They stood amidst the ruin of their own lies, confused and terrified. They still didn't understand. They thought they had just lost a business deal. They were about to find out they had lost much more than that. I set my phone down, walked to the door of the suite, and punched in the security code. The lock disengaged with a heavy thud. It was time to go downstairs. The sound of my heels clicking against the marble staircase echoed like gunshots in the silent pavilion. I walked slowly, letting them see me, the woman they had banned, the wife they had hidden, the liability they had tried to erase. Elizabeth was the first to recover from the shock, her face twisted into a mask of desperate indignation. She hissed at the nearest security guard. "Remove her! She is trespassing on a private event!" The guard didn't move. He didn't even blink. He looked at Elizabeth, then looked at me, and gave a sharp, respectful nod. "Good evening, Mrs. Chen," he said. I walked past Elizabeth without breaking stride and stepped up to the microphone that Robert had just abandoned. I looked out at the 50 guests, the bankers, the investors, the socialites. "I apologize for the confusion," I said, my voice steady. "My in-laws seem to be under the impression that they hosted this event, but the truth is you are all guests at the Obsidian Estate. My estate. The wine you are drinking is from my vines. The food you are eating is from my kitchen." And the security team standing at the doors answers to me. I turned to face Elizabeth. She looked small. All the pomp and circumstance had drained out of her, leaving just an old woman in a borrowed venue. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the folded invoice. I walked over and placed it gently in her trembling hands. $55,000, I said softly, so only she and Christopher could hear. "That covers the vintage reserves you opened, the platinum upgrades you ordered, and the venue fee you thought you could waive." Elizabeth stammered, We can't pay this. You know we don't have this kind of cash." "I know," I said. "I also know you haven't had solvency in a decade. I know because I'm the one who paid your property taxes in 2015. I'm the one who covered your legal fees in 2018. For 20 years, I have been the invisible line item in your ledger that kept you from bankruptcy. But this bill, I tapped the paper. This isn't just for the wine, Elizabeth. Consider this the invoice for my absence. You wanted a party without me? You have to pay the full price of admission. My subsidies are officially canceled." Christopher stepped forward, finding his voice at the worst possible moment. "Nicole, please." "Not here. We can fix this at home." I looked at my husband. I saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of losing me, but fear of losing the lifestyle I provided. "There is no home, Christopher. Not for us." I pulled the second envelope from my clutch, the divorce papers, and pressed them against his chest. I'm done being the foundation you drill into. I'm taking my land back. I turned to leave. I didn't look back to see if they were crying. I didn't care. But as I reached the heavy oak doors, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Brandon and Ashley. My son took off his tie and threw it on a table. My daughter wiped off the lipstick her grandmother had forced her to wear. "We're driving with you, Mom," Brandon said. Ashley just took my hand and squeezed it. We walked out into the cool night air, leaving the Chen family to explain to 50 guests why they couldn't pay the bill. In the months that followed, the Chen legacy collapsed with breathtaking speed. Without my anonymous capital injections, the dry cleaning chain was liquidated within 90 days. The country club memberships were revoked. The social standing they worshipped evaporated. It turns out, their entire empire was a shared hallucination that only existed because I allowed it to. I used to wonder what would have happened if I had left sooner. I used to think the world would fall apart without me. But standing on my balcony 6 months later, watching the sunrise over the grapes that bear my name, I realized the truth. The world didn't fall apart. Their illusion did. I built a real empire on this dirt, rooted in hard work and truth. They built a castle on a cloud, and they were surprised when gravity finally kicked in. I took a sip of coffee and breathed in the silence. It didn't smell like loneliness anymore. It smelled like victory. If you've ever been the invisible glue holding a thankless family together, this story is for you. Share this if you're done paying the price for people who can't afford your value. Subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.